Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping into something absolutely critical in the security world. It's all about making sure the security plans you have on paper are actually working in reality.
Yeah, the verification piece, it's huge.
Exactly. We're talking CISSP Domain-6, Security Assessment and Testing. It's where theory meets practice.
And it's arguably, where the rubber meets the road. Policies are great, but do they hold up? That's what this domain is about.
So for you listening, our mission here is to cut through some of the noise, give you a clear path to understanding the core ideas, the methods, the tools.
And crucially, the strategy behind it all is not just about running scans. It's knowing why you're testing, what you're assessing.
Yeah, understanding that difference between a big strategic checkup and a really focused tactical test.
Precisely.
Okay, so where do we start? I think maybe with the basics. The language here can get a bit fuzzy sometimes.
Definitely. Let's nail down the foundational terms first. We've got test, assessment, and audit. They sound similar, but they're distinct.
Right. Let's break them down. What's a test?
Okay, think small. A test is like a single measurement. It's one specific procedure, checking one specific thing against a standard you've already set.
Like running Nmap to see if, say, port 445 is open or closed on one server.
Exactly that. It's granular, pass-fail. Or maybe it records a specific value, that one action. That's the test.
Got it. Simple enough. So how does an assessment build on that?
An assessment is, well, it's bigger picture. It's a series of related tests, all planned out.
Oh, okay.
Think about doing a full vulnerability scan on a new system you just deployed. That involves maybe hundreds or thousands of individual tests, but they're all part of one planned activity.
And driven by a specific goal, right? Like checking if your patching process is actually working this quarter.
Yes, exactly. Or maybe assessing the security of a specific application before it goes live. It's usually broader than a single test, focused on an internal objective or a specific scope.
Okay, so test is the action, assessment is the planned series of actions. What about the audit then? That always sounds more formal.
It generally is. An audit is typically the most formal, the most rigorous. It's not just checking things now, it's looking back over time.
Like over the last year?
Often.
Yeah.
A year, maybe longer. It's about verifying that controls have been consistently effective and that you have the documentation to prove it. Think compliance frameworks, external validation.
Right, demonstrating that continuous compliance piece.
But here's where it gets interesting and a bit confusing in the real world.
Uh-oh.
Our sources point out this terminology conflict. Historically, people thought audit, external, formal, and assessment, internal, maybe less formal.
Yeah, I hear that distinction made a lot.
But it's blurring massively. Think about the CMMC framework for defense contractors. They have CMMC certified assessors.
Right, assessors, not auditors.
But these folks are external, the process is incredibly formal, and the result is certification. It looks and feels like a traditional audit in many ways.
So the names are getting mixed up. People use audit and assessment almost interchangeably sometimes.
They really do. The key thing, though, for anyone doing this work, whatever you call it, is making sure that activity feeds back into managing the organization's risk. That's the ultimate goal. You're gathering data, providing evidence, so the business can make informed decisions about risk.
Okay, so anchor everything back to risk management. That makes sense. Now, if we're going to do this effectively, assessment or audit, we need a plan. Let's talk strategy. How do you design an effective assessment strategy?
First things first. Objective. You absolutely have to know why you're doing this.
Because otherwise the scope just blows up.
Totally. Or you test the wrong things. Are you doing a massive wide-ranging assessment because you need to meet ISO 27001 requirements? That's one objective.
Okay.
Or did you just have a nasty data leak incident and now you need a super focused assessment on your data loss prevention controls to make sure they actually work now? That's a completely different objective.
And that objective directly dictates the scope, right? What systems, what controls are actually in play for this specific assessment?
Exactly. If your objective is testing email security after a successful phish, your scope isn't the whole network. It's the email gateway, maybe the user awareness training effectiveness, the endpoint detection on the machine that got hit.
The sandboxing tool, the incident response process for recording it. It's focused.
And that focus leads to the next critical point.
Yeah.
Consistency.
How so?
Well, if you want to know if you're getting better over time, you have to measure things the same way each time.
Ah, right. Apples to apples.
If you use different tools, different scoring systems, different people doing manual checks ad hoc every 6 months,
yeah,
the results mean nothing comparatively.
you can't track progress. Or worse, you might think you're improving when actually the last assessment just missed a bunch of stuff.
That's what we call post-assessment posture deterioration. You fix the reported findings, but because the next assessment isn't consistent, new gaps open up or old ones reappear unnoticed. Standardized methodology is key.
Okay, consistency is crucial. But assessment, especially some types of testing, can be disruptive, can't it? We need to think about operational risk.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
If you're doing something intrusive like a penetration test against a critical production system,
Things can go wrong.
things can definitely go wrong.
Yeah.
We've seen pen tests take down critical services because they weren't scoped properly or the system was more fragile than expected.
So you need contingency plans,
Yeah,
backup, and restore procedures ready to go.
you must. Management needs to approve the testing window, understand the risks, and have rollback plans documented and tested before the assessment starts. It's non-negotiable for potentially disruptive tests.
And part of that planning is deciding who does the testing, internal team or external expert.
Yeah, it's a big strategic decision. It's not just about cost, though cost is obviously a factor.
What are the trade-offs?
Well, internal teams know your systems intimately. They're cheaper up front, but they might lack true objectivity.
Yeah, maybe political pressure not to report certain findings, or just being too close to it, missing things an outsider would see.
Exactly. External teams bring that fresh perspective, that objectivity. They often have specialized skills maybe you don't have in-house. Plus, for things like regulatory compliance or benchmarking against peers, an external view is often preferred, sometimes required.
But they cost more, sometimes a lot more.
Tens of thousands of dollars for a decent pen test isn't unusual. So you weigh the need for objectivity, specialized skills, and maybe regulatory drivers against the cost and the internal team's knowledge.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, a huge area for testing these days is software itself, building security in. That means testing during the development lifecycle, the SDLC.
Right, the whole shift left movement. Find flaws early when they're cheap to fix.
Yeah.
And this brings us to what I call the AppSec trio: SAST, DAST, and IAST.
Okay, let's unpack those. First up, SAS static application security testing. You called it the early bird.
Because it happens early. SAST works by looking directly at the application's source code, or sometimes the compile code, without actually running the application.
So it's reading the blueprints, basically.
Good analogy. It's integrated right into the developer's workflow, ideally in the code phase of a CI/CD pipeline. It's fantastic at finding certain types of well-known structural flaws.
Like SQL injection, cross-site scripting, buffer overflows, the classics.
Exactly. Those patterns are often quite visible in the code itself, and the payoff for finding them early is enormous.
I saw a stat somewhere. Applications using SAST have significantly fewer vulnerabilities.
Yeah, one source mentioned a 56% lower vulnerability density. Finding a bug in dev might cost dollars. Finding it in production can cost thousands or millions if it leads to a breach.
Okay, sounds great. What's the catch? There's always a catch.
The catch is huge, actually. False positives. SAST tools are notorious for flagging things that aren't actually vulnerabilities.
But how bad are we talking?
Reports vary, but rates as high as 70% aren't unheard of. Imagine being a developer, and 7 out of 10 security alerts you get are basically noise.
Oh man, that's brutal. Alert fatigue sets in fast.
Totally. Developers start ignoring all the alerts, the real ones included. So the tool becomes shelfware, or worse, provides a false sense of security.
And it's not just the tool license cost, it's the developer time wasted chasing ghosts.
Exactly. Plus, SAST has another limitation. It doesn't understand runtime context. It can't find business logic flaws.
What's an example of that?
Okay, imagine an online banking app. The code might look fine statically, but maybe if you change the account number and the URL just slightly.
You can access someone else's account.
Potentially, yeah. SAST won't find that because it requires understanding how the application behaves when it's actually running and handling real user interactions.
Okay, so SAS misses runtime stuff. That sounds like a job for DAS dynamic application security testing, the runtime view.
Right. DAST tests the application while it's actually running, usually in a staging environment that mimics production, or sometimes carefully in production itself. It acts like an external attacker.
So it's sending requests, probing inputs, trying to break things from the outside.
Exactly. It interacts with the application's web interface, APIs, whatever is exposed. The big advantage is that the vulnerabilities it finds are almost always real, exploitable issues because it found them by, well, exploiting them.
Lower false positive rate then?
Much lower. But it finds these issues much later in the development cycle. in the test phase, or even the operate phase if you're testing in production.
And fixing bugs later is way more expensive.
Exponentially more expensive. Plus, DAST's effectiveness really depends on how thoroughly it explores the application. It might miss vulnerabilities in parts of the code that the scanner or tester just didn't happen to interact with. Code coverage can be lower than SAST.
So SAST is early but noisy and blind to runtime. DAST is later, more accurate for what it finds, but potentially less comprehensive, and fixes are costly. Sounds like we need something that bridges the gap.
And that brings us to IST Interactive Application Security Testing, the hybrid advantage.
Interactive? How does that work?
IST tries to get the best of both worlds. You deploy special agents or sensors inside the running application, often during automated functional testing.
So it's inside, watching.
Yes. As the application runs and handles test requests, the IST agent analyzes both the code execution and the data flow in real time. It combines static analysis techniques with dynamic runtime context.
Ah, okay, so it sees the code and how it behaves with real data.
Exactly. This allows it to pinpoint vulnerabilities with high accuracy, like DAST, but also trace them back to the specific line of code, like SAST. And it provides this feedback almost instantly to developers during the testing phase.
That sounds powerful for CI/CD pipelines, faster feedback loops.
Hugely beneficial. Sources suggest it can reduce the time to find and fix issues by up to 30% compared to traditional DAST workflows.
Okay, again, the catch. This sounds complex to set up. Agents inside the app.
That's the friction point, definitely. Configuration can be challenging. You need to deploy these agents correctly across different environments, ensure they're monitoring the right things.
And performance. Running an analysis agent inside a live app sounds like it could slow things down.
It can introduce performance overhead. Operations teams are usually very sensitive to that, especially under load. Misconfiguration is also a risk. If the agent isn't set up right, you might get partial results or miss things entirely.
So there's no silver bullet. It sounds like a mature organization probably needs a mix of all three.
That's often the conclusion, yeah. Use SAS for foundational code hygiene early on. Use DAST to check the external attack surface before release. And maybe use ASED within the CI/CD pipeline for faster feedback on critical applications during development and testing, layering them strategically.
Okay, that AppSec trio makes sense. Now let's shift from the application itself to more general, tactical testing, the classic, penetration testing.
Ah, yes, the adversarial simulation, trying to
Wow.
break in like a real attacker would.
It's not just random hacking, though, is it? There's a methodology.
A very clear one, usually 5 steps. Step 1 is discovery, sometimes called footprinting or reconnaissance.
This is passive stuff, looking at public records, websites.
Mostly passive, yeah.
Yeah.
Gathering information that's already out there, domain registrations, company website analysis, finding employee names on LinkedIn, identifying technologies used from job postings, building an initial picture without directly touching the target systems.
Okay, step 1, recon. What's step 2?
Step 2, enumeration. Now we start getting active, but usually still relatively gently.
Like port scanning.
Port scanning, identifying running services, finding accessible network shares, maybe mapping network architecture, identifying user accounts if possible. You're actively probing to see what's alive and listening.
Got it. So discovery finds the target area, enumeration maps out the specifics. Step 3.
Step 3, vulnerability mapping or vulnerability analysis. You take everything you learned in steps 1 and 2, the systems, the software versions, the open ports, the services, and you compare it against known vulnerability databases.
Like CVE databases, exploit DB.
Exactly. You're identifying potential weaknesses based on the discovered configuration. Okay, they're running this old version of Apache, and I know it's vulnerable to X, Y, and Z.
Makes sense. Now for the exciting part. Step 4.
Step 4, exploitation. This is where the tester actively tries to leverage the identified vulnerabilities to gain unauthorized access or achieve a specific objective.
Trying to get a shell, escalate privileges, access sensitive data.
Precisely. This is the core hacking phase. It requires skill, creativity, and careful execution to avoid causing unintended damage.
And finally, after the smoke clears, step 5.
Step 5, reporting. And this is arguably the most important step, though sometimes it gets rushed. You have to take all those technical findings
And translate them into business risk.
Yes. A detailed report explaining what was found, how it was exploited, what the potential impact is, and, crucially, providing actionable recommendations for fixing it, tailored for both technical teams and management.
Okay, that 5-step process makes sense. When we talk about exploitation, step 4, what kinds of fundamental flaws are common targets? You mentioned a few earlier related to programming.
Yeah, there's some classics. First, you have kernel flaws. These are vulnerabilities deep inside the operating system's core.
Getting kernel access is basically game over, right?
Pretty much. It gives the attacker the highest level of control, ring zero privileges. They own the system completely. Yeah. The only real defense is diligent, prompt patching of the OS.
Okay, kernel flaws. What else? You mentioned buffer overflow.
Still a classic, sadly. It's fundamentally a programming error. A program sets aside a certain amount of memory, a buffer for some input, let's say 10 bytes for a username.
Okay.
But the code doesn't properly check the length of the input it receives. So an attacker sends 100 bytes.
Uh-oh. Where does the extra 90 bytes go?
It overflows the allocated buffer and writes into adjacent memory areas. If the attacker crafts that overflow data carefully, they can overwrite critical program data, like the return address of a function.
And redirect the program's execution to malicious code they injected.
Exactly. If that program was running with high privileges, the attacker's code now runs with those same privileges. Mitigation is about defensive programming, always check input lengths, and using tools or languages that help prevent these.
Nasty stuff. And the third one was more subtle, race conditions. Specifically, TOCOU.
Yeah, time of check to time of use, or TOCTO. This is a timing attack. It exploits the tiny delay between when a program checks for a security condition and when it actually acts on the resource based on that check.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Imagine a privileged program needs to write to a log file. First, it checks, time of check, if the user running it has permission to write to varlogap.log. Let's say the check passes. Then, in the tiny fraction of a second after the check, but before the program actually opens the file to write, time of use, the attacker quickly swaps varlogap.log with a symbolic link pointing to, say, etc. password.
Wow.
The privileged program, having already passed the check, then proceeds to open what it thinks is app.log, but is actually the password file, potentially overwriting it or corrupting it.
That requires very precise timing, but I can see how it could be devastating. Defending against that sounds hard.
It involves careful atomic operations in programming, minimizing that time gap, and using security-focused design patterns. Code scanners can sometimes help find potential race conditions, too.
Okay, so those are some common vulnerability types. Now, when a pen test is set up, the amount of information the tester gets beforehand varies, right? That's the whole box colors thing.
Exactly. It defines the tester's starting knowledge level. The most common are black, white, and gray box.
Let's start with black box. What's that?
Black box means the tester gets almost zero information beforehand. Maybe just the company name or a target IP range.
Yeah.
They have to figure everything out from scratch, just like a real external attacker would.
So it's realistic for simulating an outside threat.
Very realistic for that.
Right.
But it can also be inefficient. The tester might spend days just doing basic discovery that could have been provided, and it might miss internal vulnerabilities that an attacker could find after an initial breach.
Okay, so black box is zero knowledge. What's the opposite end? White box.
White box is full knowledge. The tester gets everything. Source code, network diagrams, system architecture documents, maybe even administrator credentials.
Wow, okay. When would you use that?
It's great for doing a really deep, thorough assessment of internal controls, code quality, or application logic. It simulates what a malicious insider with high-level access might be able to do.
But it's not realistic for an external attacker scenario.
Not at all. And it requires a lot of cooperation and information sharing from the organization being tested.
So, black box is no info, white box is all info. The middle ground must be gray box.
And that's often the sweet spot, the most common approach. With gray box, the tester gets some information, maybe standard user credentials, some network diagrams, application URLs.
But not the full source code or admin access.
Right. It gives the tester enough information to bypass the initial, time-consuming discovery phases and focus on testing higher-value targets more efficiently while still maintaining a good degree of realism about what an attacker might know or figure out.
Makes sense. Is there another type? I think I've heard of stealth assessment.
Yes, sometimes called a double-blind test. This is less about the tester's knowledge, which might be black or gray box, and more about the defenders.
Meaning the internal security team.
Exactly. In a stealth or double-blind test, the organization's Security Operations Center, SOC or Incident Response Team, is not told that a test is happening.
Ah, so you're testing their detection and response capabilities.
Precisely. How quickly do they notice the simulated attack? Do their alerting systems fire? Do they follow their incident response plan correctly? Do they escalate appropriately? It's a direct test of the blue team's effectiveness.
That sounds valuable, but probably needs careful coordination at a high level so things don't spiral out of control.
Extremely careful coordination, yes.
Yeah.
You need clear rules of engagement and deconfliction procedures.
Okay, speaking of tools and testing, you mentioned a tricky point earlier about how tools are perceived, especially in like a certification context versus technical reality. The OS fingerprinting example.
Ah, yes, this is a great illustration of thinking like a manager or an auditor versus thinking like a hands-on tech.
Okay, lay it out.
Imagine a question. Which of these tools, Nmap, Nessus, Nikto, or SquallMap, is least likely to identify the target operating system?
Okay, technically. Nmap has excellent OS fingerprinting. Nessus is a vulnerability scanner. It definitely identifies the OS. Nikto scans web servers, but server banners often reveal the OS SquallMap. That's for databases, right? SQL injection.
Primarily, yes. But if you read the SquallMap documentation, it actually can perform OS detection and even has options for OSPN trying to get a shell on the underlying OS through the database.
Okay, so technically, all of them could potentially identify the OS to some degree. A skilled user could probably figure it out with any of them.
Exactly. That's the technical reality. But if you're answering this for a certification like CISSP or explaining it to management,
You need to think about the tool's main purpose.
precisely, what is the tool designed to do? Nmap and Nessus are fundamentally about scanning and identifying systems, including the OS. Nikto is web-focused, but OS info is a common byproduct. SquallMap's core mission is SQL injection. OS detection is a secondary advanced feature.
So from that perspective, SquallMap is the one least likely or at least primarily designed for OS detection.
Correct. The lesson is understand the tool's primary function and intended use case, especially when communicating upwards or in a formal assessment audit context. Don't get bogged down in edge case technical capabilities unless necessary.
That's a really important distinction. Focus on the core mission. Let's apply that kind of critical thinking to a real-world scenario. You mentioned the Eternal Bleak case study from a pen test report. That sounded serious.
So it was a prime example of high-risk findings. The pen test report highlighted systems vulnerable to the Eternal Blue exploit.
That was the SMBv1 vulnerability, right, used by WannaCry.
The very same.
Yep.
It targets a flaw in the old server message block version 1 protocol, usually over TCP port 445. Specifically, vulnerabilities in the Windows print spooler service, spoolssv.exe. The relevant CVEs were CVE 2017-0143 up to NEDGES 0148.
And the report found vulnerable systems, even important ones.
Yes, critically important ones, including servers handling security functions themselves and remote access terminals used by administrators, even systems processing sensitive patient data.
Yikes. And what happens if that exploit succeeds?
It's essentially instant total compromise of the Windows machine. The exploit typically results in gaining NT authority system privileges.
The highest level on Windows.
Right.
Kernel level.
The highest level.
Yeah.
From there, an attacker can do anything. Create new admin accounts, disable security software, steal any data on the system, pivot to other systems on the network.
Or deploy ransomware like WannaCry.
Exactly. In this specific case study, the fact that a remote desktop server containing patient health information was vulnerable meant an exploit wasn't just a system compromise. It was an immediate, major compliance failure and data breach scenario.
Just finding that vulnerability, even without exploiting it, is a critical finding then.
Absolutely. But the report didn't stop there. Just running basic Nmap scans revealed other widespread issues.
Like what?
Well, they found systems vulnerable to a denial-of-service attack targeting the Windows Secure Channel Implementation channel. That was CVE 2014-6321. But perhaps more pervasively was the widespread use of weak and outdated encryption protocols and ciphers. Nmap flagged multiple systems still enabling SSL-v3 or using weak ciphers like 3DES and RC4.
Which are known broken, right? Vulnerable to attacks like Poodle for SSL-v3.
Exactly. Poodle, Suite 32. These protocols offer negligible security by modern standards. Finding them enabled means an automatic fail against many compliance standards, like PCI DSS version 3.1 and numerous NIST guidelines. It showed a systemic failure in configuration management and patching.
So that pen test, that point-in-time snapshot, revealed both critical, exploitable flaws and broader systemic weaknesses.
Correct, which highlights the value of these tests. But they are snapshots. Systems change daily. How do we get more continuous assurance?
Good question. That leads to more advanced simulation techniques, doesn't it? Like red teaming.
Right. Red teaming is a step beyond a typical penetration test. It's less about finding every vulnerability and more about simulating a specific adversary with a specific goal.
So not just break in, but maybe steal the secret formula for product X, or gain persistent access to the financial reporting system.
Exactly. The red team emulates the tactics, techniques, and procedures, TTPs, of a known threat actor group. Maybe nation-state, maybe organized crime. Their focus is on achieving that objective while evading detection by the blue team. It's a much more realistic test of the organization's overall detection and response capabilities against a determined attacker.
Okay, so red teaming is goal-oriented adversary simulation. What about breach attack simulation, BAS? That sounds more automated.
It is. BAS platforms provide automated continuous testing. They typically use software agents deployed inside your network.
And these agents run attacks.
They run simulated attacks. Think of that like defanged malware or known attack techniques implemented safely. They'll try to move laterally, escalate privileges, exfiltrate sample data, all within a controlled environment to see if your security controls detect and block the activity.
So it's like having automated mini pen tests running all the time.
In a way, yes. It's often delivered as a software as a service, SaaS solution. It provides ongoing visibility into whether your defenses are working as expected day after day. It's great for validating security control configurations and catching regressions.
Does it replace human pen testing or red teaming?
Not entirely. BAS is excellent for testing known TTPs and validating controls continuously. But human testers bring creativity, can find novel vulnerabilities, and can chain exploits in ways automated systems might miss. They complement each other. BAS provides breadth and frequency. Humans provide depth and ingenuity.
Okay, that makes sense. We've covered assessment strategies, AppSec, pen testing, advanced simulations. Now let's talk about the foundation that supports all this. Continuous monitoring, logs, and metrics. You can't assess or respond without good data. Let's start with logs. Why are they so fundamental?
Oh, logs are absolutely essential. They're the ground truth, the evidence trail.
For incident response.
Definitely for incident response. Try and figure out what happened during a breach without logs is like trying to solve a crime with no witnesses and no forensic evidence. It's nearly impossible.
What else are they crucial for?
Establishing baselines of normal activity so you can spot anomalies. Performing forensic analysis after an event. And meeting a ton of compliance requirements. FISMA, HIPPO, SOX, GLBA, PCI, DSS. They all mandate logging and log retention.
So if they're that important, that means attackers really want to tamper with them, right, to cover their tracks?
Absolutely. Log files are a primary target after a compromise, especially for sophisticated attackers using rootkits designed specifically to manipulate or delete log entries. That makes log integrity paramount.
How do you protect log integrity? What are the key things?
First and foremost, you need accurate time synchronization. If logs from different systems aren't time-stamped accurately and consistently, correlating events across those systems becomes a nightmare.
Trying to piece together an attack timeline when one server clock is 5 minutes off from another?
Yeah, impossible. Right. So, network time protocol, NTP, is critical. You need a reliable internal NTP source, and all systems should be configured to sync with it regularly. That's foundational.
Okay, time sync is step one. What about protecting the log data itself from being changed or deleted, especially if the attacker gets root on the machine generating the logs?
This is where remote logging comes in. Don't store critical logs only on the machine that generated them. Send them in near real time to a separate, dedicated, hardened log server or SIEM system.
So the attacker has to compromise two systems to erase their tracks, raises the bar.
Significantly. You can also implement technical controls like ensuring the log writing process on the central server only has append-only privileges. It can add new logs, but it cannot modify or delete existing ones.
What about the network path? Can logs be incepted or modified in transit?
They can. So ideally, you'd use secure protocols like TLS to encrypt logs in transit. Some high-security environments might even use simplex communications media, essentially a one-way data path, physically or logically enforced, so the log server can receive data but cannot be compromised or commanded from the sending systems via that path.
Okay, so remote logging, append-only, secure transit. How do we verify logs haven't been tampered with after they've been stored, maybe in long-term archives?
That's where log file integrity checking comes in.
Yeah.
Usually using cryptographic hashing.
Like MD5 or SHA-1, or newer ones like SHA-256.
Exactly. When a log file is closed or archived, you calculate its hash, a unique digital fingerprint, and store that hash value securely, maybe separately. Later, if you need to verify the log's integrity, you recalculate the hash if it doesn't match the stored value.
You know the file has been altered, even by a single bit.
Precisely. It provides mathematical proof of tampering.
We mentioned sending logs to a central system. You hear syslog and SIM thrown around. What's the difference there? Are they the same thing?
Not quite. Syslog is a standard protocol for sending log messages. It's very common, widely supported, but the basic protocol itself, especially older versions using UDP.
UDP is unreliable, right? Fire and forget.
Yeah, no guarantee of delivery, no inherent security, limited structure to the messages. It's simple, but basic.
So what does a SIM bring to the table? That's security information and event management.
A SIM is a much more comprehensive system or platform. Yes, it centralizes logs, often using syslog or proprietary agents, but its real power comes from normalization, analysis, and correlation.
Normalization means getting logs from different sources into a standard format.
Exactly. Taking Windows event logs, firewall logs, Linux logs, application logs, which all look completely different, and parsing them into a common structure with standard field names.
And why is that important?
Because once the data is normalized, the SIM can correlate events across all those different sources. It can spot patterns that indicate a complex attack unfolding across multiple systems, something a human looking at raw logs from individual devices would likely miss.
Like seeing a failed login on the firewall, followed by a successful login on a web server, followed by unusual process execution on that server. The SIM connects the dots.
That's the idea. Plus, SIMs provide alerting, reporting, dashboards, and often long-term storage and forensics capabilities.
Yeah.
It's a huge step up from just collecting raw syslog messages.
Okay, so we have this logging infrastructure, maybe a SIM. How do we actually test that it's working? That the logs are being generated, collected, and analyzed correctly?
You need validation processes. We can break them down into passive and active methods.
Passive methods sound less disruptive.
They are. Passive methods involve reviewing configurations, checking settings on devices to ensure logging is enabled correctly, examining the logs being received by the SIM, reviewing archived logs, comparing everything against your established policies and procedures. It's essentially a documentation and configuration review.
Important for compliance checks, I imagine.
Very important. But it doesn't necessarily prove the system works under fire. For that, you need active methods.
Which sound more hands-on and probably require more planning.
Definitely. Active methods involve actually generating security events to see if they get logged and detected.
Like running a vulnerability scan against a specific segment and checking if the SIM alerts on it. Or maybe even attempting a controlled exploit from a pen test.
Exactly. You trigger an event, then you follow the data flow. Was the event logged locally? Was it sent to the SIM? Was it parsed correctly? Did it trigger the expected alert? Did the SOC respond according to procedure?
That sounds much more thorough for verifying actual capability.
It is, but it's also more resource intensive. You need time, expertise, and crucially, management approval, especially if you're generating potentially disruptive events on the network. But it's the only way to be sure your detection and response mechanisms truly work end-to-end.
Okay, so we have all this data from tests, assessments, logs, SIEMs. How do we turn that raw data into something meaningful, especially for management? This sounds like where the security metrics framework comes in.
Precisely. It's a structured way to think about measurement and reporting. It starts with a factor.
What's a factor?
A factor is just a high-level attribute or category you care about, like network intrusion detection, or patch management effectiveness, or user awareness.
Okay, a broad area. Then what?
Then you get a measurement. This is the raw data point you collect related to that factor. For example, 42 alerts from the network intrusion detection system today, or 12 servers are currently overdue for critical patches.
Just the raw number.
Just the raw number.
Yeah.
By itself, it doesn't mean much. 42 alerts. Is that good or bad?
Depends on context, which is where the baseline comes in.
Exactly. The baseline provides that context. It's your reference point. Could be historical data. We usually get 10 alerts a day. An industry benchmark or a target threshold set by management. We aim for 0 overdue critical patches.
So you compare the measurement to the baseline.
And that gives you a metric. A metric is a derived value, often a ratio or percentage. That puts the measurement in context. For instance, network alerts increased by 320% compared to the daily baseline, or 5% of critical servers are non-compliant with the patching policy.
Ah, okay. Now that starts to sound like useful information.
It is. And the most important, most impactful metrics, the ones that really indicate performance or risk, rise to the level of an indicator.
And you often hear about two main types of indicators for executives, right? KPIs and KRIs.
That's right. KPIs, key performance indicators, are generally backward-looking. They tell you how you performed against your goals in the past or how you're doing right now.
Examples.
Things like mean time to detect, MTTD, or mean time to resolve, MTTR, for security incidents last quarter, or the percentage of systems currently compliant with the security baseline configuration. They measure efficiency and compliance achieved.
Okay, so KPI looking back, what about KRIs, key risk indicators?
KRIs are the forward-looking ones. They're designed to be early warnings, like the canary in the coal mine. They signal potential future problems or shifts in the organization's risk exposure.
So they're predictive.
They aim to be, yes. They focus on underlying conditions that could lead to a bad outcome. For example, while a KPI might report that you successfully patched 95% of vulnerabilities last month, a related KRI might track the percentage of employees who click on links in simulated phishing emails each month. If that KRI starts trending upwards,
It indicates a growing risk of a future breach succeeding due to human error, even if your patching KPI looks good right now.
exactly. KRIs try to give you a heads up about increasing operational risk or potential future failures, allowing you to take proactive steps before the bad thing happens. They're much more focused on future business impact.
That distinction is really important for communicating with leadership. KPIs show results, KRIs show potential trouble ahead.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And good metrics, whether KPI or KRI, need certain characteristics. They should be smart, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound, or, as some sources put it, relevant, quantifiable, actionable, robust, simple, and comparative. The core idea is they need to be clear, useful, and drive decisions.
Right, not just collecting numbers for the sake of it. Okay, this brings us nicely to the final stage, taking all this assessment data, all these metrics, and turning them into action. Analysis, reporting, and remediation. Let's start with a strategic tool, the cybersecurity gap analysis.
A gap analysis is basically a health checkup for your security program. You compare your current state, your policies, controls, practices against a recognized standard or framework.
Like the NIST cybersecurity framework, or ISO 2701 PCI DSS if you handle cards.
Exactly. You use the framework as a benchmark to identify where you have missing controls, where existing controls are weak, or where things just aren't implemented according to best practice.
And it's not just technical controls, right? A good gap analysis looks broader.
Oh, it has to. You need to look at policies and governance, technical security, maybe pulling in pen test results, physical security controls, the critically important human factor, training awareness, incident response capabilities, compliance posture. It should be holistic.
And the output is basically a list of, well, gaps, things you need to fix.
Right, which leads directly to remediation planning.
Yeah.
You can't fix everything at once, so you have to prioritize.
Based on risk.
Always based on risk.
Which gaps represent the biggest potential impact if exploited? Which are most likely to be exploited? You tackle the high-risk, high-impact items first.
And then create a plan, a roadmap.
A detailed action plan. What needs to be done? Who owns it? What resources are needed? What are the timelines? It becomes a documented roadmap for improving the security posture, which you then track and manage.
Okay, so gap analysis finds the problems. Remediation planning schedules the fixes.
Right.
But when you get results back from any assessment, a pen test, a scan, an audit finding, you need to analyze them properly. You mentioned the 3 questions as a framework for this. Yes, it's a simple but powerful way to move from just technical facts to actionable business intelligence.
Okay, what's the first question?
What? What are the objective facts? Just state what was found, clearly and concisely. Example, the vulnerability scan identified 12 servers running Windows Server 2008, which is end of life and no longer receiving security patches.
Okay, just the facts. Then question 2.
2. So what? This is where you add context and determine the business impact. Why does this fact matter? Example, so what? Well, these 12 servers run our critical legacy inventory management system. If compromised, inventory tracking stocks, which halts production shipping. We cannot easily patch or replace them in the next 6 months due to dependencies on a third-party application that only runs on 2008.
Ah, okay. Connecting the technical finding to the actual business process and impact,
Well,
and acknowledging constraints.
Exactly. You might also mention existing compensatory controls here. However, these servers are isolated on a segmented network with strict firewall rules, and access is heavily restricted.
Got it. Facts, then impact and context. The final question.
3. Now what? What should be done about it? Provide clear, actionable, and balanced recommendations. Example. Now what? We recommend maintaining the existing network segmentation and firewall rules as compensatory controls. Implement enhanced monitoring specifically for these servers in the SOM immediately. And critically, initiate the formal project and budget approval process to replace the legacy inventory system within the next fiscal year. accepting the residual risk in the interim with documented management sign-off.
So it's not just patch the server. It's a thought-out, risk-based recommendation that considers the business reality.
That's the key. It balances security needs with operational reality and provides a clear path forward for management.
That framework is really useful. Let's apply it to one of the trickiest areas, the human factor. We looked at a social engineering case study with some pretty alarming results.
Yeah, that one was eye-opening. The assessment included telephone-based pretexting and attacker calling staff pretending to be IT support or a new employee needing help.
How did that go? What were the facts?
The what was stark. Out of just 10 targeted phone calls, the attackers achieved 3 full breaches, gaining enough information to likely access sensitive systems, and directly obtained 6 user passwords from staff members who violated policy by giving them out over the phone.
Wow. 6 out of 10 gave up passwords. That's bad.
Very bad. And the so what analysis looked at those passwords. They found the company policy only required 8 alphanumeric characters.
Which is easily crackable these days.
Trivial for attackers with cloud computing resources. Days, maybe weeks at most. So the weak passwords amplified the risk from the successful pretexting, and a phishing simulation backed this up. 13 out of 175 users clicked malicious links or opened attachments.
So the SOLA is that social engineering is a highly probable attack vector because the human defenses are weak and the technical controls, password policy, aren't strong enough either?
Exactly. The analysis concluded that the path of least resistance for an attacker was likely through social engineering targeting employees.
Which leads to the now what, the recommendations.
The recommendations had to address the root cause. Immediate, mandatory social engineering awareness training for all staff, focused on recognizing pretexting and phishing attempts. Clear reinforcement of procedures for reporting suspicious activity, and, crucially, a technical change, increasing the minimum password complexity requirement to 10 characters, including complexity, upper-lower number symbol.
Addressing both the human vulnerability and the technical weakness.
You have to. It's a layered problem.
Okay, so all these findings, analyses, recommendations, they need to be communicated effectively. That means writing the impactful technical report. You mentioned it needs to serve 2 audiences.
Yes, this is critical. The report needs to provide deep technical detail for the IT and security teams who need to actually implement the fixes. But it also needs to communicate the high-level risks and required actions to senior management and executives who may not understand the technical jargon but control the budget and strategy.
How do you structure a report to do both?
It starts with a killer executive summary. This is non-negotiable. 1 or 2 pages, max. It needs to be hard-hitting, summarizing the most critical findings and their business impact.
And you said something earlier about quantifying risk in monetary terms here?
Absolutely essential for the executive summary. Translate the risks, potential downtime, data breach fines, reputational damage into potential dollar figures as best you can. Speak the language of business, money.
Okay, exec summary first. Then what?
Then you detail the methodology. What was tested? How was it tested? Who did the testing? When did it happen? Were there any systems explicitly excluded from the scope? This ensures the test is understood and, importantly, repeatable.
Makes sense. Then the main body.
The findings section. This is where you lay out the what for each vulnerability or issue discovered. Group them logically, maybe by severity or by system or by vulnerability type. And crucially, include the so what analysis for each finding. What is the actual risk and impact?
And following logically from findings.
.com's the recommendations section. This provides the now what for each finding. Clear, actionable steps to remediate or mitigate the risk. Each recommendation should directly map back to 1 or more findings.
You mentioned quantifying risk for management. How do you actually put a dollar value on these things? It seems hard.
It is hard and often involves estimation, but it's necessary. There are a few standard valuation methods. The cost approach. What would it cost to replace the asset if it were destroyed or lost? The income approach. How much revenue does this asset generate or support? Losing it means losing that income stream. The market approach. What would someone else pay for this asset or a similar one on the open market?
Okay, so you estimate the asset's value. But risk isn't just the value, it's about likelihood and controls too, right?
Exactly. You need to factor in the probability of the bad thing happening and the chance that your existing controls might fail. A simplified way to think about the remaining risk, the residual risk, is asset value probability of loss control failure rate.
So even with a control, there's usually some residual risk.
Almost always. Controls aren't perfect. And you have to add the control cost itself to the equation. The goal is to show management that the cost of the recommended control is justified because it significantly reduces the potential financial loss represented by that residual risk calculation. It frames security as an investment, not just an expense.
That framing is key. Okay, nearly wrapped up. 2 final important process points: exception handling and ethical disclosure. What's exception handling about?
Sometimes you find a vulnerability, but you genuinely cannot fix it immediately. Maybe it's in a critical legacy system where the vendor no longer exists, or a medical device where patching requires lengthy regulatory reapproval.
So you can't just ignore it.
Absolutely not. You need a formal exception handling process. This means implementing compensatory controls, maybe isolating the system on the network, increasing monitoring, restricting access. Then you document the vulnerability, the reason it can't be fixed, the compensatory controls, and the residual risk.
And get management to sign off on accepting that risk.
Yes, formal management approval is required. And critically, the exception isn't permanent. You schedule a future date to revisit it. Maybe technology will have changed. Maybe your replacement system will be viable. You formally accept the risk for a defined period.
Okay, that makes sense. And the last piece, ethical disclosure. When does that apply?
This applies when your assessment work uncovers a brand new vulnerability, a 0-day, something nobody knew about before, perhaps in a commercial product you use or even in your own software you sell.
What's the obligation then?
You have a professional and ethical obligation to disclose that vulnerability responsibly. Typically, this means notifying the vendor of the affected product privately first.
To give them a chance to develop a patch.
Exactly. You coordinate with them on a disclosure timeline, allowing them time to fix it before you or they announce it publicly. The goal is to get the vulnerability fixed before malicious actors find out about it and start exploiting it widely. It's about protecting the broader ecosystem.
Got it. Responsible disclosure is key. Wow, okay, we've covered a lot of ground here, from high-level strategy down to specific tools and processes.
It's a big domain. It really connects all the planning and policy work to tangible results.
Let's try to boil down the key takeaways for everyone listening.
Okay. I think first it's about having that holistic view. You need both the formal, long-term verification of audits and the targeted point-in-time checks of assessments. It's not one or the other.
Right. And within assessments, especially for software, use that layered approach SAST early. DAS for the outside view, maybe IS for rapid feedback. Use the right tool for the job.
And think like a manager when choosing and talking about those tools. Focus on the primary purpose and the risk, not just the technical possibilities. Remember the OS fingerprinting example?
Good point. Then there's the foundation, solid logging and monitoring. Protect those logs, sync those clocks, use a sum for correlation.
And turn that data into intelligence with metrics, KPIs to show where you've been, KRIs to warn about where you might be going. That forward-looking KRI piece is so important for proactive security.
Absolutely. And analyze findings using that what, so what, now what framework to ensure recommendations are risk-based and actionable.
Don't forget the human element. Social engineering tests often reveal the biggest gaps, and remediation needs training just as much as technical fixes.
And finally, communicate effectively through well-structured reports that quantify risk for decision makers, handle exceptions formally, and disclose new vulnerabilities responsibly.
That about covers the core pillars, I think.
It does. So here's a final thought to chew on. We've established assessments are snapshots, systems change constantly, threats evolve, and often the human element remains that persistent weak link. If all that's true, how can we really leverage these KRIs, these forward-looking indicators, and maybe things like continuous automated testing like BAS, to build a security culture that adapts and learns even faster than the threats themselves? Can measurement actually accelerate cultural change?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Moving beyond just technical checks to truly influencing behavior and awareness at scale continuously, it implies your assessment process never really stops.
Something to think about. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into CISSP Domain 6.
My pleasure.
We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.